Hello, Internet. Welcome to our very first podcast episode. I'm Sunny.
And I'm Raj.
And we're here to talk about Singapore. Well, not specifically Singapore, but there's a fair bit of context that we need to get into before you understand what this podcast is about. So Raj and I listened to this podcast called American Daisies. And it is essentially a podcast about, the Indian American identity, where they, talk about the various identity issues that they have as a person of Indian ethnicity living in the US. None of that is relevant to our podcast. It's more about one particular line in one of their episodes that really riled me up a bit. Raj, do you want to talk about it?
Well, you can go ahead.
Okay, all right.
I'm just listening to you.
So there was one episode where, they're going on about something and, the topic of Singapore came up. And this was just a throwaway line. It was like...
almost like a filler.
Yeah, it just seemed like a throwaway joke of sorts. So the joke goes like this. What's the difference between Singapore and yogurt? And the punchline is, yogurt has culture. And that was it,
It was not even funny.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's funny, I would give credit where it's due, but it's not even funny.
Well, to be fair, like, in the context of the joke, it was kind of witty. But what I couldn't understand, or what really bothered me, was that they considered that joke as gospel truth. Like, they considered that particular, witty line as a fact that, yes, Singapore has no culture.
Well, to be fair, one of them did go to Singapore,
yeah,
but the other did not, and he just believed the other guy.
Yeah, so, and I understand that, and I do realize that, and I do also understand that, Singapore wasn't even the topic of their discussion.
Yeah.
But it brings back, memories of various conversations and various things on the internet that I've read about this very popular notion, I would say, that, Singapore somehow lacks culture or soul, so to speak. Raj, have you had these conversations before with people?
Other than you?
Yeah, besides me, of course.
No, I've not. But the general thought, or rather the general school of thought, is that, Singapore is barely 60?
True.
Since independence. And that is what they think of history. They do not go before independence. And that is something I guess they would have to learn about before talking about whether Singapore has history, culture, or soul.
That is true, and I completely agree with you. I think, countries which are younger in comparison to the rest of the world tend to have not as much, what's the word for it? They wouldn't have as much, I don't want to use the word significance, but they don't have a bigger cultural footprint, because of the fact that they're young countries. And I completely understand that. But on top of all of this, there's this pervasive notion that Singapore somehow lacks soul. And to be really honest, I've had this conversation with a number of people before, who have lived in Singapore, who've moved here, and then, their idea of what Singapore is essentially based on, Singapore, modern nation, but, it lacks something. It doesn't feel natural and shit like that. Now, and this bothers me quite a bit. Okay, for those of you who are new to this podcast,
What do you mean by new? This is our first podcast.
Yep, sorry. I forget that sometimes. So I'm a foreigner living here in Singapore, and I've been living here for about 8 years. And, after you live in this place for this long, you kind of get into... you kind of understand what a place is all about and stuff like that. And it really bothers me when, some people come in, stay here for a couple of months and they're like, I know everything about what this country's about and I'm going to play world expert now to people at a bar.
To be fair, I've met a few people who know more about Singapore than me.
Well, see, context guys, Raj is Singaporean and...
born and bred.
Yeah. And as with everyone from their own home countries, they tend to take their identity and history for granted. So it stands to reason.
I do know a little bit about the history of Singapore, but maybe not too much on the touristy side of it.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? As a local, you probably did not put too much thought into what goes on because, you've been living through it your whole life, and it's kind of like background information that you have in your head, but it's not like a talking point in a bar. That's not the first thing that you talk about in a bar, right?
That is true.
Whereas, like for someone who is new, if I were new to Singapore, and if people ask me, so how do you like Singapore? I'd be like, oh, it's this and this and this, and then and especially if I have traveled a lot, I will tend to have this tendency of talking about a particular country as though I'm an expert of it.
That is something I do not agree. Like, what people do when they've visited a certain country and they come back, okay, this is my checklist, I've been there. But compare, for example, Philippines or India or any big-ass countries. You can't just go to a certain city and come back and say, hey, I've been to this country, I know every single thing about this country.
In an ideal world, people wouldn't do that, but people do. And that is like the whole point of why, we wanted to start this podcast. Like, my belief at this point is that I feel that the perception of Singapore is essentially based on a bunch of these guys that we were talking about. You have a bunch of these people coming in, talking a bunch of, coming in, making their own assumptions and stuff like that, and then going out, and they have this particular narrative that ties in to... It's a very Eurocentric narrative, if I may say so.
Why would it be Eurocentric?
Well, I need to take a step back and go back to certain things that defined why Singapore is like a stuck-up nation in popular culture, right? So there's a perception that was defined by someone called William Gibson in the 1990s. So he was a journalist for the Wired magazine. He came into Singapore, and he was the one who coined the term Disneyland with the death penalty. And so, so this was in the early 90s, and his write-up portrayed Singapore as this, uber-modern nation, but with this undercurrent of it was like an Orwellian utopia of sorts. Everything is fine and dandy at the top, but underneath there's like an undercurrent of some sort of something evil, And it's so weird for me to read this because I can understand where he's coming from, because he was going into various facets of Singaporean history that probably did fit into that narrative. But at the same time, that has now become the definitive springboard from which people are basing their opinions on. And
yeah, it's the same thing as chewing gum, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yes. Please, Raj is probably in a better position to talk about the chewing gum thing. Please, go ahead.
So I do not know how or when this became a very popular notion.
Yeah.
That Singapore, you are not allowed to chew chewing gum in Singapore or buy chewing gum in Singapore, or you can't even sell it. But that's not true. So you can chew it, you can buy it, but you can't sell it. Unless it's, nicotine gum. So if you're to bring chewing gum from Malaysia for your own personal consumption, fair, go ahead. I mean, chew as much as you want, but just don't sell it. And, that's something which the law does not allow.
Yeah. And it's gone to a point where, that little factoid has just mutated to something like, oh shit, if I chew gum, I will get the death penalty, Isn't
that a bit extreme?
It is, but at the same time, that's a very popular narrative. And I'm saying this because quite recently there was a thread on Reddit where, Singapore was one of the top posts for something related to, I think it was...
your comic?
No, it was in the comic, but we'll get to that in a bit, folks. This was on Reddit. There was a post about one of the more iconic buildings here in Singapore, the Interlace, I think.
Right. Yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
So it was under the subreddit called architecture porn or something, and it was a fantastic 360-degree drone shot of the place. It looked really cool. And so of course people talked about Singapore, this is in Singapore and all that, and then there's a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of comments where people go, oh yeah, I lived in Singapore for a year. Oh my gosh, Disneyland death penalty. Oh shit, you'll die of chewing gum. And I'm like, really? Did you really live in Singapore? Are you serious?
Or did you only hang out with your expat bubble?
Ah yes, and then that's
in your expat bubble.
Yeah, and which I also have a problem with, It's there's a bunch of folks who have these preconceived ideas based off of one particular essay in the 1990s. And I'm not saying that's the only source of information from which they're basing all their opinions on. But every single narrative about Singapore is from an outsider's perspective. And when I say an outsider's perspective, I'm looking at from a white expat's perspective. Okay, I shouldn't use the word white. I should Western expats perspective. It's a very Eurocentric idea of what Singapore is. we've had numerous conversations about Singapore being like, oh, too clean and sterile, only because people's perception of an Asian country is supposed to be gritty and, it's got to have that earthy chaos, and the fact that they see buildings and roads is just...
And cleanliness.
Yeah, they're like, oh, no, this is not what...
Oh, shit.
I wasn't sold... This isn't the Asia that I was sold to, and this bothers me so much because, they have... most people tend to have a very blinkered idea of what this little corner of the world is, and what...
Hey, some of them, they do not even know where Singapore is until they arrive.
And, I think that's... It's I mean, let's face it. There are a lot of places that we don't even know about and stuff like that, right? But that doesn't make us go, "Oh, I'm going to base this country on something from
someone else."
From what someone else said back in the 1990s, etc., etc. So, long story short, the podcast is all about the real Singapore, or at least we're trying to understand
from our point of view, at least.
Correct. So, as a foreigner living in Singapore, and not pretending to live in Singapore on Reddit, and so the idea.
See what you did there.
Yeah. It happens, right? Sometimes, on that particular subreddit thread, I was going through the discussion. I'm like, nah, these guys can't live in Singapore. There's such bullshit on those comments. But yeah, so this podcast is going to be about stuff that happens in Singapore from the perspective of a foreigner, me, and from a local. And we hope that gives a more well-rounded idea of what Singapore is about. So yeah, that's pretty much it about intros.
So about the podcast, American Daisies, so you said that they did a throwaway line.
Yeah.
But what about the next podcast that I told you to, look up?
So I kind of got bored of the American Daisies podcast midway, and I kind of stopped. But then Raj, managed to get all the way up to episode 60. Where
it was a killer getting up there. I mean, sometimes it was just... the main reason I try and listen to them because some of the podcasts is really interesting. Some of them is just you know what? I just want to go back to sleep.
Yeah, I feel you, man. But overall, it's still a pretty good podcast. And so at Raj's suggestion, I listened to episode 60, wherein one of the hosts goes to Singapore. So he's like a stand-up comedian, and he goes to Singapore and Malaysia on tour, and he loved it. He talked about what did he talked about?
He basically said that what the Americans think, what they think Indians are supposed to be, doctors and stuff. In Singapore, everyone thinks otherwise.
Yeah. So the bigger context here is that as...
it's an athlete.
Correct.
Or someone who's fit.
Yeah.
And I do not know where he exactly got that from, because none of us are fit. Well, some of them are, but...
But maybe it's where they come from in the US, where, according to them, most people who are ethnically Indian tend to veer towards academics.
Right, like being a doctor, being an engineer, being a researcher or some sort.
And stuff like that. And so with that particular background, finding, normal people of Indian ethnicity living normal lives is just crazy for them. They're like, what? Indians play football? That's crazy. But then again, American Daisies is all about, the hyphenated American identities, and maybe that's why they're focusing on that.
Yeah, and on top of that, he actually said that in the States or Canada or whatever, so most construction workers, cleaners, and all that, they were basically saying Mexicans.
Yeah.
Whereas in Singapore, Malaysia, it's usually the Bangladeshis or the Indians or somewhere from South Asia.
Correct.
And that was something which they couldn't really get their grasp on.
Yeah. Which goes to show how different, their ideas of what a multicultural society should be, And it was interesting because Akash, one of the hosts, said that, no, Singapore is multicultural, and it was multicultural in a way that he wasn't used to.
Right.
It is very different from the term multicultural in America, which I'm not too aware of that. What was interesting
Excuse
to me
me.
about that episode was that the other host seemed to have some sort of ideological problem with Singapore. You
Yeah,
know?
that. To be honest, when I heard his point of view, I was like taken aback. So, what do you mean that if you travel to another country and it's a place where you just see buildings and you feel that, oh, I've not traveled? It's like I'm back home. Dude, that's a lot of difference.
Yeah, and it's what really bothers me is that he's like, and you know, in a way I can understand where he's coming from. If he's traveling to a new place, I think novelty is one of the things that we look for when we're traveling, which makes sense, right? But then just because you see a bunch of buildings, you can't go like, oh, this is not the Asian country that I was, looking for. You know, he
Was told while growing up.
yeah, exactly, right? So he's like, oh, but I'm in Asia. I'm supposed to see like grit and grime and, earthy exoticism. So he was sold on the exoticized Asian ideal. And somehow, because Singapore didn't fit that particular ideal, he's like, no, Singapore lacks soul. Because it's too
the
familiar.
proper word that he used was hate. And hate is a really strong
Yes,
word.
yes. It really bothered me about, like, where is that hate coming from? You know? Okay, so maybe, there are people who tend to use strong words, like, hyperbole is kind of a huge part of language for a lot of people. They're like, you don't like vanilla flavored ice cream, you fucking hate it. It
Alright,
could be something
it's
like
something
that.
like me and durians. I hate it. Like, I hate it. If you tell me eat a durian or they will take my life, please.
Really? Okay.
I mean, the smell is just too much for me, man.
Durians, future topic for the podcast. I do have a lot to talk about that. That aside. So yeah, what was interesting was that there was that contrast with what Arjun, the other host, felt what Singapore was. And this is what I wanted to focus on. Like, why do people think that Singapore, A, lacks culture, B, somehow is soulless, C, why do they feel that being clean and sterile and having glass and concrete buildings make a nation less so? And this is what we wanted to delve into.
Hence our very first podcast, and I guess a lot more to come.
Yep. That's the dream.
That's the dream. Right, shall we dive into
the poll?
the survey?
Yes.
The poll, the survey.
Right. So about the poll, a bit of background. Somewhere along these lines, when we were talking about this, we decided to sound out some of our friends. So we created a survey.
Well, to be honest, it was just you who created it.
Well, Raj was giving me moral support. So, so in this particular survey, what I wanted to find out was what soul meant to different people. Based on a lot of discussions that we've seen online, soul is such a subjective term.
And no one gives the right answer.
Yeah,
like, that's no right answer, apparently.
And and that's the thing, right? So it's like soul means different things to different people, and that's completely fine. It's like one of those vague sounding words.
So what do you think, in your opinion, when people say Singapore lacks soul?
Well, see, like my opinion. Okay, so I might as well put out my opinion before we go into the survey. My belief is that when people say Singapore lacks soul, what they mean is that Singapore lacks the novelty of a place that we perceive to have, something else of. Like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm wording this correctly, but essentially it's like
architecture and stuff.
Yeah, so it's like, people are sold on this idea of what soul is. Like, some people say that, soul is about, architecture, like you said. Some people say that soul is about, arts and the scene. Some people talk about, freedom of speech, which, like, it entirely depends on who is talking about it.
Yeah.
Like, if someone were to come from a country
But, I mean, they will probably say that based on some of their favorite things or what they like to have and what they think it's not available in Singapore.
Yeah, see, this is my problem, right? So everybody's definition of soul is very different, okay? And it's completely fine for people to have different ideas of what soul is, but somehow all of these people tend to agree that Singapore lacks all of these things, And that is what bothers me, but at the same time, I do want to find out why people feel the way they do. So I asked a bunch of friends about what they felt soul meant in our survey. And, there are some general questions, and I tried to make it as neutral as possible. And the results that we got from this survey were pretty interesting. So my first question was, of all the countries that you have been to, which one do you think has the most soul? The intent is to find out, what's their general idea of what soul is, right? So what's interesting about this question, or the answers to this question, is that
no one had one same country.
Correct.
Everyone had different countries, and I guess that was what their basis was. They were comparing Singapore to those countries.
Yeah.
And it's 14, 15 different countries?
Yeah, 15 different countries, and the respondents were about 15 too. So it's everybody has a different opinion, and that's all right, So we can understand that soul is a subjective thing from this alone. It's based off of personal experience, and I think that's all right. Having said this, Spain got mentioned twice.
All right, so 14 countries, 15 people.
Yeah. So yeah, apparently Spain is the most soulful country, and let's find out why. Now, the next question that I asked was, why do you think the country of your choice has the most soul? Describe the various things about that country that makes it have soul. So the answers are also pretty interesting. Raj, I would like your comments on some of these things. One answer to what makes the country of their choice have so much soul was cultural activities and events like Songkran, local arts, and festivals like Artbox.
Don't we have that?
Yeah,
I mean, we do have Thaipusam, we do have a number of stuff going on. Chinese New Year, head down to, I don't know, Chinatown, the floating bay, and then you've got this Islight Marina. I have no idea what is it got to do with the soul thing. But I mean, yeah, there are cultural festivals going on. It's just that you need to know where to look.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if there is an issue of, selling art events here in Singapore. It's not as prominent on the tourist agenda as compared to the rest of...
Yeah, so for example, if you're to go to London, you want to check out the Broadway.
Yeah.
In Singapore, I don't think many people do that because it's bloody expensive.
That is true. I think price also factors into a lot of these things.
But then again, they do still have cultural activities at Aliwal Street Centre, Aliwal something art centre.
Yeah, Aliwal Art Centre, correct.
Yeah.
And there's no dearth of visitors there. It's just that I guess a lot of people don't.
I guess they do not have the enough finances to basically market it to the masses.
Yeah.
And that's why people do not hear about them, and then they come up with their biased opinion, I guess.
Fair point. That's also true. Other comments are actually pretty. One is pretty specific. He gets weird. So this person's answer to what makes the country of his choice soulful, so he apparently chose Brazil, because he's when you hear of Brazil, you usually associate it with a few things: music, dancing, soccer, and love. When you visit
I'm guessing love goes to women.
I'm guessing so too. When you visit it, you find that the people embody exactly these things. There was music everywhere, people danced and partied even when they're alone. Social interactions were flirtatious, sensuous, and even erotic at times. And of course, every corner had a group of kids playing soccer. Maybe I was lucky to visit it during Carnival, when the soul was most evident, but when you consider the fact that I observed these traits in the favelas, the slums of Brazil, which are very poor, it's a clear sign of how deep these characteristics are etched into the Brazilians' richer poor.
Don't you think that actually comes off with because he was there during that festive period? It's just that period that they're really out and wild because, I mean, it's a festive period.
That is true. And but at the same time, he does mention that these traits are observed in areas where celebrations are probably not that big a thing.
But they did still have that.
Yeah, they still have that. So, but maybe it's an ingrained it's an ingrained cultural trait. But what really interests me about this comment is that the social interactions are flirtatious, sensuous, and even erotic at times. So what I'm getting from this is that this dude got laid there, and that has colored his opinions of what soul is.
That's just really, that's the bar for him.
Yeah, so it's so this simply means that if you got laid in the country, that country has soul. If there are hot chicks who've been talking to you, soulful country. That really stood out for me because I'm all of his words made a lot of sense, but that emphasis on social
Sensual,
interactions, yeah,
erotic.
exactly. And I'm like, yeah, dude, okay, all right, we get it, you know. There's a bunch of other stuff on this too, which is in a similar vein, but yeah, we'll go to the next one, which is, if someone asked you what soul meant, what would you tell them? And this is a question to the survey responders. The answers varied from someone saying a sense of identity and strong cultural markers, and someone else says a sense of genuine connection and understanding about a place brought about by authenticity, culture, geography, architecture, and the people in it.
Well, that's like basically everything from a historical point of view.
Some people, have all these vague sounding words like, having soul means that you care more than superficial human needs.
So this basically comes on to a point where a friend of mine and I were discussing about taking different flights, different companies. So, and he was against taking Singapore Airlines because he feels that Singapore Airlines, they're just forced to serve you. Like the stewardess and stuff, and the stewards, they're just forced to serve you. The smile is fake. Nothing is genuine in that company. And then he compares it with other airlines, and he said the other airlines, the smile is more genuine, and they serve you with, in a genuine manner. And I was like, how do you know what's genuine and what's not?
Yeah, that's like the most stupidest opinion I've ever heard. No offense to your friend, but holy shit, come on. Everyone's getting paid, to serve you, man. Nobody likes serving stupid customers or passengers in an airplane, all right? It's just... But yeah, it's a fair point. So I think it also illustrates the fact that it is a perception thing.
Yeah.
He feels that Smiles is genuine. So yes, this airline is the airline I want to put my money in, which makes no logical sense, because is that how you decide where you want to travel to? Yeah. Oh, that lady smiles a lot more, let's go with her. Come on, dude. So there's similar answers like this. Something says, all right, so one answer was something cute and lovely inside which makes you love and enjoy everything around. It's very subjective, and I'm not sure if we should...
So what's cute and lovely? A teddy bear?
Singapore doesn't have teddy bears, it seems. Okay.
Hey, now, dude, we got Singa the lion.
The next questions are going to be about Singapore, and the question that I asked was, do you think Singapore has soul? What is very interesting about this question is that, once again, it's all across the board. There's a fair bit of people who said they agree that Singapore has soul, and a fair bit of people who disagree that Singapore has soul.
So the answer was more of a 50-50.
Yeah.
So this 15 people, they were split. Half of them said no, half of them said yes.
But, I feel that there was probably some bias that we injected into it by asking them outright. Okay, so maybe I'm
all right, so you know what? So it's basically, you're basically asking them, okay, put your opinions at a corner, and now just answer this, yes or no.
Yeah, so then they'd be like, oh, yeah, but then the reason you're asking this question is probably because if I said no, it's probably the wrong answer, so I'm just going to go with yes, Once again, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I feel that because the question put forth wasn't organic enough, we probably aren't getting...
Well, your very first question kind of was organic enough for them to choose everything. So
that's a fair point.
So, I mean, this counts, I guess.
Okay, yeah, that's I never actually thought of that. All right, cool. So the follow-up question was, if it was yes or no, why do you think so? Now, the questions, once again, are fairly varied across the board.
The answers?
I want... Yeah, they're varied across the board, but there are some answers that I really want to focus on. The generic answer for people who agree that Singapore has soul is that Singapore is a young immigrant nation, but there's still something uniquely Singaporean. So there's a reluctance. It's not reluctance. It's just that there's an idea that soul is still there, albeit
on the surface.
Yeah,
or?
No, not as obvious as
right.
other places, right? But it's there, right? Now, the answers that I want to focus on are the ones who have disagreed that Singapore has soul, right? There's one which is, okay, this one goes, you need to peel some layers made of conformism, lack of imagination, general fear of trying anything different, and government control to keep the status quo with the excuse of being safe. There are some very interesting and genuine people out there, but sadly, it looks like the minority.
Well, I kind of do agree on that, whereby the whole cultural upbringing of anyone who I know, it's about failure. Like, no one wants to fail. Everyone wants to be, do well in academics, get a job, and just keep on doing well. No one wants to try, or rather, the people that I know, they do not want to try something which they probably would have to spend a year or two in it just to see it fail, and then they will miss out that 1 or 2 years.
Okay, but to that question, like, is that different from anywhere else? Like, okay, maybe that's not the right way to approach this. I'm asking this because people talk about the life plan a lot. Okay, so people talk about life plan a lot. There's a life plan. You grow up, you go to school, you go to university, get a job, get a house, get married, and all that stuff,
and die.
Yeah, and like, so I'm from India, and we have that. So the life plan is like encoded in our DNA. So
I guess I still have it as well.
Well, it's like, so when people talk about, the life plan and how it's like, the social pressure is asking us to conform and stuff like that, it's not like it's not there anywhere else. That does exist. Like 95% of everyone in the world conforms to, a similar life
a society norm.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's the word I was looking for. And, and so sometimes I just don't agree with the idea that one particular place is overwhelmingly, conformist, right?
Right.
There's probably a perception there.
It's almost like, the paper someone wrote about Singapore being kiasu.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you read that?
I didn't read it, but yeah, go on. Tell us a little more about it.
So it was like someone who was staying in Singapore talking about like, getting into getting onto the MRT platform, trying to get into the list, but no one actually cared about that person who was with a toddler and a pram or something. Everyone just went in and just looked at her while the door closed and, went down to the ground floor. And then again, she said that was the only bad experience, and then she had like good experience whereby people her offered umbrella when she was walking in the rain and a few other good stuff. And then she comes to the point whereby how Singapore is where it is because of this mentality from the past, whereby think of yourself, or rather I guess her point of view was more of like, think about the country, how is it going to survive, and that's how the whole kiasu culture was born, and it's still breeding through, Singaporeans.
But does that? Okay, so obviously kiasu is, so kiasuism, as a term, as a social norm, is a very Singaporean thing, right?
I would say so.
Yeah, but then is that a trait that gives other people the license to call it soulless?
I mean, no. That's top of my head. I'll just say no.
Because like a lot of these things, a lot of these.
I mean, yeah, you can be disgusted by it. Yeah, you can be annoyed by it. But hey, when in Rome,
right? Yeah, and it's just.
And it's not that we do not have soul, or it's not that we don't care. We do not care about the rest. It's more like, what? I'll try to sort myself out before I'll try and help others. It's like, in a plane when the oxygen mask or whatever you call it falls down. Even the people that the safety videos and all that, they'll tell you to wear the mask first before helping others, or even before helping your kid.
So that is the pragmatic approach, and I want to ask you this: as a Singaporean, does kiasuism define being Singaporean?
Wow. Well, I do not think it actually defines, but it is part of it.
Okay. So you're saying that there are a lot of cultural markers that defines what being Singaporean is?
Yeah.
Right? And kiasuism is one of them.
Yeah.
Right? But kiasuism isn't like an overriding trait.
I would say no, but
Okay.
I would say maybe if you give me a percentage, I'll probably say about 60 to 65%, and this is just my opinion. It's there.
Yeah, so folks, that was a completely made up percentage. Very arbitrary.
A figure pulled up from the air.
All right. So yeah, I just wanted to. So there was one other answer which I really want to talk about, and this is the last answer to this.
Or maybe the podcast.
Yeah, it is
because we're cutting off soon.
Yeah. So it's like, so the question was, why do they think that Singapore has soul or not? And this is one answer which really blew my mind. I do not think Singapore has an evolved social structure. A country with such high economic prowess should have better social systems in place.
Eurocentric.
Old folks shouldn't have to work in food courts cleaning plates. I personally think the whole idea of excelling in Singapore is a big farce of the pseudo-capitalist American ways, while the political scenario is a pseudo-communist China way.
Well, to be
honest, what do you think, Raj?
To be honest, there's certain point, like there's only one point that I agree on that comment, is that where the elders or the elderlies are like still, cleaning, working in food courts or hawker centers and other buildings as a security guard or cleaners and stuff. They shouldn't have to do that. But the rest of it, I do not quite agree, whereby, yay, Singapore is rich and everyone should have welfare and stuff.
There's a lot to unpack in this comment. Okay, number one, that whole thing about old folks, I don't think that's even a discussion that should come into whether a place is sold or not. But having said this, let's just analyze that for a bit. What it is 2018, all right? Like, our perceptions of retiring at a time when our parents did is not going to happen, all right?
Well, unless the government would give me like 500 a month, hey, you know what? Just sit at home and do nothing. Yep, fine.
Yeah, like in a
dude, if you're 65, if the government gives you like $500 a month to maintain yourself, I guess $500 a month is enough if you're not going out like drinking every night or doing.
No, but here's the thing, right? Like, who are we to talk about whether old folks are doing this out of necessity?
Okay, yes, I do agree on that. Some of them, they do they do not want to sit at home and just rock their life away. They would want to.
So it's like
do something productive, but.
Okay, dude. Okay, so this is probably not related to the soul of Singapore or stuff like that, but I want to talk about this for a bit. Think of it this way. You probably started working in your early 20s, right?
Yes.
And, considering current employment norms, we retire around 65, I guess. So we're talking about a good 40 years of, employable life, right?
That's good enough.
And, because of the miracles of modern medicine, people live well into their 80s and 90s. And I dare say by the time we get there, we're probably living into like past 100, right?
Oh, fuck, I do not want to do that.
Well, but here's the thing, right? Like, so modern medicine will probably allow us to live a better quality of life at a more advanced age, right? So think of it this way. You are going to retire at 65 and you have 35 more years of your life ahead of you. And is it really realistic to expect that someone is going to give out handouts for 35 years?
Okay, in my mind, for me, for example, if I even reach the age 65, I'll probably stay alive. I don't know, given my family, ancestry, heritage, whatnot, I'll probably die like before I'm 70. So yeah, I think I'm in the right position to ask that.
Like, if we're going to take like personal examples, like I totally understand. No, I get it, I do. But it's like, so what I'm trying to understand is that.
Okay, yes, it does not make sense. But however, have you seen those people? Like, they look really frail. They're almost hunchbacked, and yet they're cleaning plates, like everyone's just.
Okay, so I have the problem that I have with this sentiment is that, number one, this is the fact that old people are working, past their prime, etc., is more a symptom of being in a very urban environment, which is competitive. It is not endemic to Singapore. Okay, it is not specific to it. It applies literally everywhere. The only reason why this is gaining credence in Singapore is because we don't have a space that's not urban, and so that's all we see.
That is true.
And so to use that as a benchmark on which to decide whether a place has soul or not is kind of weird. So essentially, what
All right, this whole discussion right now, the past 5 minutes has nothing to do with soul.
Yeah, it's nothing to soul, but then
It's just about our own
and
feelings.
But then at the same time, like, I do want to level my criticism on this particular comment, because this person is using social issues as, reasons for saying that, oh, that's why I think Singapore doesn't have soul. But then, like, if we were to talk about social issues, tons of countries have tons of problems. Like, I don't hear anyone say that the US of A doesn't have soul because of all the gun violence. Huge social problem over there. Kids are being shot down in high school, left, right, and center. But hey, you go to New York, like, hey, New York got soul. So, and this is my problem, right? So, like, this.
Right. Okay. Now I get where you're coming from.
So this strikes me like as a very. He's like, what's the word for it? He's using social issues as. Okay. Yeah. I think I've been talking a little too much about this, but.
Well. Sunny was getting really passionate about this. Oh, he is very passionate.
But then
what we can do is perhaps keep that comments and put it for a later podcast.
Yeah, we can do that. Like,
because, ladies and gentlemen, our time is up.
There is a lot more that we want to talk about this, and hopefully over the from what you've been listening so far, this is kind of the topic or the topics that we will be exploring.
Yes.
Over the next
and we'll probably invite friends,
Yep.
colleagues, someone to join us for a conversation.
Yep.
Or tea or coffee or beer.
Yep. Mostly beer though. So. All right. So Raj, any comments or last words?
Last word. I'm Raj.
And I'm Sunny.
Catch you later.
All right. See you guys. Until next time.